Welcome to our Greensboro Montessori School September Head of School Huddles. Very happy you could spend some time with us this evening. On this call, we have about 50 of our families. We'll be doing it panelist style, so we won't see each other. With those families, we have approximately 100 students represented. Of those families, I think we have about 6 healthcare workers. 10 of those families are new families to our school this fall. One of our past head of schools is on this call. Good evening, Frank. We have a bunch of teachers, both from our team and from who teach at other schools and who are parents at our school. To each and every one of you, we're so happy you're here. We're happy that this huddle, we get to talk about what we love, Montessori values and pedagogy, a little different than our past huddles where we've been talking exclusively about COVID-19 new procedures. So I'd like to begin this evening, along with appreciating everyone being here, I'd like to start with a pause. So most of us are probably moving pretty quickly to get to this point of the evening, be it wrapping up work, or if we have children or family at home that we're putting to bed. So I'd love for us to start with this pause. Think back to your childhood, to a time where you first learned or discovered or experienced something new. A single moment, one time where just that new thing, that new idea, that new concept, that new practice that you experienced, that you learned. I'd like you to just go to that place, try to think of a single moment. Think of that for a moment and think how that feels, what made it special or memorable. We're going to start our evening right there. Well, hopefully that gave you a minute to center your thoughts as we get ready to talk about how children learn, discover, and experience new things. So I'd love to bring to the screen our 3 panelists this evening, and we'll get this evening going. So I'll ask that you hold on to that image that you just had, and we'll revisit it at the end of the night. So for this evening, welcome to our 3 panelists. I'd love to do a quick introduction of them, and then I'll invite them to further introduce themselves. So first, our guest for the evening, Munir, welcome. I'm glad to have you. Munir is currently the executive director, and he's the past board president of the the Montessori Society, AMS, American Montessori Society. Munir himself is the founder of 2 Montessori schools. He has founded an adult training center. One of his credentials, I know he has at least one, is in early childhood. And he's one of my trainers. I first met Munir when he helped me with my administrator credential this summer. Another panelist is Missy. Missy, welcome to the school. She's been on the job for 31 days, and we've kept her plenty busy those 31 days. She is our lower school director. With Nancy transitioning away from the school, it felt really good to bring in such a strong Montessorian as Missy. Missy has an early childhood credential, an elementary 1 credential, an elementary 2 credential. She helped co-found a Montessori middle school, helped co-found a Montessori high school, and she herself is an adult trainer where she trains other Montessori teachers as well. Missy, thank you for being here. And last but not least is Ben Payne. Ben joined our team about 1.5 years ago. He, like I, are Montessori and didn't know it. We've had careers in independent and private and charter and public education and have come to Montessori in different pathways. And Ben is currently engaged in his elementary 1 and elementary 2 credentials, and he is our director of upper school. So Ben, welcome, thank you for being here. So my first question for each of you is, in your current professional work, so what you're doing in your work, what most draws you to Montessori? What inspires you? What fires you up? What draws you to Montessori? I mean, I'd love to start with you as our guest for the evening.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Kevin. I love my work and I don't feel like I work. Montessori has been a blessing to me beyond the classroom and the American Montessori Society. The guiding principles of Montessori are the same beliefs I follow beyond the educational methodology: respect, prepared environment, hands-on learning, discovery, freedom of choice, imagination, independence. It's not about competition, and everyone's story is valuable. And Montessori moves from concrete to abstract, facilitates a natural love for learning, seeks to educate the whole child, and really focuses on the individual child and their potential. And so truly, this is what draws me to Montessori education and to Montessori as my choice in my career path.
I love it. And thank you again for sharing time with us tonight. We're excited to have you part of our conversation. Missy, you want to go next and then Ben?
Sure. Every single day I walk into the school, I just get this huge sense of gratitude for this school and this community that has been so welcoming to me at a very weird time in modern history. But one of the things that just I'm fired up about Montessori is the inherent dignity in everything that Montessorians do. There is so much respect for the innate abilities of the child, and understanding that not all children are going to show up the same way, but that they all have beautiful things to offer the world. And that whether that child's a toddler or that child's an adolescent, we honor what they bring to the table and we validate what they bring to the table so that they feel like they are a part of our big cosmic puzzle that we're all figuring out our place in. And the inherent respect and joy. There's so much joy on the faces of the children, not all the time, not every day, but you step into a classroom and there is just this feeling of peace and joy. And I haven't seen that replicated anywhere else.
Great, thanks, Missy. Ben, what are you fired up about Montessori right now? What's inspiring you?
Yeah, right now is when you're in the school building at Greensboro Montessori School, you don't feel like you're in a pandemic. You feel like you're at home, and that you feel like you can do anything you want to do. And it's a fantastic feeling to step into the school every day. It's such a privilege, and just as Missy said, to feel like you're part of this family and to feel like you're supported, and all the students can feel that too. You know, the term that we're using in junior high, the Montessori term of valorization, of self-actualization, of feeling that you are essential to the community. And you can tell that we all feel that, the students feel that, everybody does. And so it's through the work of the head, the heart, and the hands. It's the real life work, the applied work, but also more than anything, you know, coming from public education, all you hear all day long is data-driven results. And students aren't data. We're not made up of data. And so we actually, in the Montessori philosophy, you actually do follow the child, and you actually see where the child is and what's best for each individual child. And so to be at a school like Greensboro Montessori, where we have the gifts to do that with the leadership, the faculty, the resources, the families, and the philosophy behind all that, it's outstanding. It's a joy, even with all that we're dealing with outside of school. It's just a joy every day to come. So I'm fired up.
Love it. And so each of those themes that you all shared, I think we're going to unpack parts of those throughout the night. So our plan for the night is we'll be having conversation in part on the movie, the documentary Inside Montessori, that many of you saw. And if you didn't see it, you're going to more than be able to enjoy and join this conversation as well. And we're going to unpack some of the key tenets of Montessori, how it lives at our school and beyond. And we're also going to take a pause and say, how is this working in COVID-19 world? Both Montessori across the country, with Munir being the executive director of AMS, he has lots of stories of how Montessori schools are doing it across the country. And Missy and Ben are going to share stories of some things that we've lost. You know, everything's not perfect, but man, how we're making it happen. There's magic happening in this building right now. It's really a pleasure to see. So to reconnect us to the video, we're going to start with play a little 3-minute clip from Inside Montessori to refresh you with that video. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to ask both our audience and our panelists to chat at us. If you don't have the chat window open, you can hover your mouse down by the bottom of your screen. There's a little chat icon. But chat at us or think or reflect, what are some of the consistent elements that if you watch the video that you saw across 5 different schools? There's 5 very different schools portrayed, but there's some very consistent pieces across that. If you didn't see the video, what are some of the consistent pieces you've seen with your experience at our school? So is joy something you see? Is that pink block thing that I have no idea what it's for, is that something that's consistent as a parent? I know what it is, Missy, come on. Like I said, I'm trained. But so we're gonna play this 3-minute clip, and if you want to chat at us, we'll kind of look at it as you go. But what are some consistent themes that you saw in the video that are refreshed by this little 3-minute clip right now?
Education is in such trouble all over the world, not only here. Everywhere I hear only people complaining, our system doesn't work. What is, in my opinion, the real problem is that we have forgotten what is education for. We've thought that it is to prepare our children for a job or for a situation that we think they will face. The future is unknown. What we need to do is to prepare our children to be able to face the unpredictable, which is what the future is. Education is not about creating somebody ready to fit into a pre-organized position. So the purpose of education is much broader. It's to help people to become full human beings and members of the human community.
The task of education must change. What school really ought to be for is fostering the growth and development of children. From the earliest years, it must be developmental, in the most, in the deepest sense, developmental, brain developmental. And then into the elementary years, it must be about problem solving and social development. And I think in the later years, it really has got to be about, motivation, mission, and purpose. What are your unique capabilities? What are your unique interests? What are you going to bring to the world that makes you something special? Traditional education can't do that. Well, the underlying assumption in traditional education is that teaching is telling. So what we're here to do is we're here to tell students stuff. The assumption is that every child in a class can get through the same amount of stuff within that 9-month academic year. And of course, this is absurd. Everyone knows who's been in a classroom that not every child will proceed at the same pace. But every child is destined to be something. And maybe there's a way to do education that would kind of have something for everyone. Many have written or spoken of what school should look like from a developmental perspective, but nobody created the complete developmental package that Montessori did.
Okay. So that was just a quick snippet from Inside Montessori, the documentary. And I love that piece that Steve said at the end, that nobody has created such a thorough pedagogically driven school system that's based on children development. And living in Greensboro, where we have one full Montessori school, and Irwin Montessori School is a charter, you might not know that there are over 22,000 Montessori schools across 110 schools. We are part of a massive network that has been doing this methodology for over 100 years. I just love that the way Steve says that, like she did such an amazing thing in starting this journey that we're all on. So a couple people chatted us. I saw Bill and Meg and Cindy with some of the things that you see as consistent. Feel free to keep chatting at us, but I'm gonna pop it to our panelists, either from the documentary or from your work at our school or work at other schools. What are some of those consistent little nuggets? We'll get into the big themes. What are some of those consistent things that are so important in Montessori classrooms that you three have experienced? Yeah, Missy, what do you got?
And one of the attendees mentioned it too, that sense of beauty and order that's inherent in all of the environments. It was you, Kevin. No matter what classroom you go into, it's not gonna have the same beauty and it's not gonna have the same structure, but there are elements that when you walk into a Montessori classroom, even if it's an adolescent classroom where there's not as many materials as there are in the younger ages, you can kind of tell that you're in a Montessori classroom. There's just a vibe, there's the beauty, there's the inherent respect for self, others, and the environment.
And Missy, one of the questions that keeps coming up is that cosmic education is, why am I here? And how am I going to add to this world? What's my place in it? And that's something that referenced in the video right there in that little clip. But that you can't do that when everybody's doing the same thing, when you're just being told from the teacher standpoint. But in the Montessori framework, you really get to figure out and be encouraged to see what do you have to offer, where do you belong. It's really wonderful.
I agree. I mean, I think the cosmic focus on each development, and when we look at our whole planes of development theory, actually starts at the infant and toddler level, just from basic coming to consciousness, the physical regulation and language. When we go into the early childhood section and we really think about self-regulation and the concept of normalization and this natural wonder of the world, all our classrooms beautifully are prepared in a way that fosters these cosmic tasks in each of the developmental planes from infancy through adolescence.
When we think about that, sometimes I pinch myself as an educator. I've been spoiled to have been in great schools all my life. And for those of you who've had your careers in Montessori, or for our families on the call who've been at schools for a long time, I mean, we're so fortunate that we get to work and learn and live at schools that focus on this. Through no fault of their own, so many schools don't have the ability to do that. It's not a comparison that we're better or worse than other people, but just we're so fortunate that we get to focus on school for the cosmic task of finding out what children's calling is and who they want to be. And our mission statement is to unleash their full potential. And we use that word very intentionally, whoever they are, you know, whatever they choose to be, a poet, an artist, a good partner, a good friend, a CEO, a doctor, a tradesperson, whatever they do, we want them to do it with honor and vigor. So I love those thoughts. Well, let's take it a little broader. So one of the things that all of us have done in training is we sometimes have to boil down what Montessori is to a 30-second pitch. I'm sure Missy has her teacher ed students do it. I'm sure Munir has his teacher ed students do it. It is not an easy task. And a lot of the parents on the call are like, yes. Tell me what in the world is Montessori, the 30-second pitch? Instead of doing the 30-second pitch, I want to remind all of us of what 5 of the core tenets are for Montessori. And these are laid out by AMS. But 5 of the main tenets of a true AMS trained, certified, accredited school: Montessori trained teachers, check. And I've said this before, but a training is not a little thing. My training cost almost $20,000 and was over 600 hours of practicum work. And it's huge commitments. It's practically masters for most of us. Multi-age classrooms. That seems like a subtle thing, but it is so important to us. And logistically, it's tricky to manage, but it's so important to us. At our school, check. Montessori materials, check. You see them. They are expensive, and they are so important to us. They're so important to us. And the last 2 I want to talk about: child-directed work. That the work is driven by the child, and also the uninterrupted work cycle. We're going to talk about those 2 things. And when I think about the child-directed work, and when I think about the uninterrupted work cycle, these 2 words come up for me of independence and agency. And independence and agency for the child to be motivated, inspired, and allowed to affect their environment is not the normal thing that happens in schools. And so I'm going to start with you, Munir, if that's okay. Where does independence and agency, how does that resonate with you when you think about the core values of Montessori, those 2 words?
I mean, it connects to what you said just now, child-directed work. Students are given the agency to self-select work in the classroom, which then leads to this intrinsic desire and motivation to work. And then indirectly, it supports the development of concentration. And so agency, refers to learning through these activities that are meaningful, relevant to the learner, and the ownership of that knowledge belongs to the learner. And we have a full scope and sequence of Montessori materials with teacher training that's tied to the materials. And all of these materials have indirect and direct aims, and there's a connection with all of these materials, particularly at the early childhood and the elementary levels. And these materials, I believe, are the core to the learning experience. And it's driven by the student's interest. It's driven by having this self-desire to choose this work and engage in this work. And of course, when the child chooses this work, there's appropriate guidance the teachers give. They're trained into, connecting the learner with the materials. And so for me, I think, simply put, agency supports the independence in our Montessori programs. It gives students a voice, choice, and how they learn, which is core to Montessori philosophy.
I want to follow up real quick on that idea of that if independence is propagating and promoting agency, you're saying that the materials help promote independence. Sometimes from the outside looking in, people think, oh, they have free choice. They can do that work all day long. And while the answer is sometimes yes, there's also guidance. How do you train teachers? I'll put this to Missy and Munir. Munir, if you want to start, how do you train teachers to support that independence? How do those materials, how do they do that? Like, what's the functionality of how does that work?
Great question. I think, in teacher training, we first have to, before we even get into the materials and talk about the materials, we really focus on understanding the overall philosophy of what we're trying to achieve and accomplish in the Montessori classrooms. And so while the materials, the scope is there, the curriculum is there, and it's important, it's still not the most important aspect of what we do and the approach that we take. And so all of the fundamental principles of Montessori education, when we're talking about independence, we're talking about respect in the environment, we're talking about the freedom to function in a classroom, having social relationships. When that foundation is established, the teachers, through careful observations, are able to connect where they are with the curriculum and the materials. And so one thing that's so powerful that we do not really talk about or show off in Montessori is the critical skills that children gain are indirectly achieved in the prepared environment through interacting with these materials, through repeating these lessons over and over again, through the repetition of these materials, then getting their own aha moments and how it connects to other areas of the classroom. And that happens naturally by the children, not by me or Missy or the teachers in the classrooms telling them that this is what the connection is.
Missy, how do you train your adult teachers or our teachers, our team, to help have those materials promote independence, which can then fuel agency?
Well, Munir said one of the things that I think is most important, and that's observation. Maria Montessori was first of all a scientist, and as a scientist, she found observation critical to be able to make good predictions and plans and things like that. So in order to truly understand the child, you have to observe the child and see where they are. Montessorians also talk about these things called sensitive periods, which means that there's a particular time when their brain is really susceptible to picking up certain kinds of information. And by observing, we can tell when children are in these sensitive periods. And then when they show interest in some of the materials, for instance, if they're having a sensitive period for math, numeration, then the teacher who's done observations can connect that child to counting the chains or doing some place value work with the golden beads. So that is very, very important. And I think one of the things that's popping for me right now is the idea that they have free choice and there are limits. they don't have the choice to walk around and not choose anything ever. They don't have the choice to interrupt other children's work. And that becomes part of that social construct that Munir was talking about, that foundation of building the community. So it's always freedom within limits, I think, is one of the things that I always include in my elevator speech that changes every time I give it. Because that's an important, I feel like that's a really good definer for Montessori, because people either think that it's too rigid or they think that it's, you know, like a free-for-all. And it's not. It's observing the child, figuring out where they are in their abilities with agency and independence. What kinds of choices can they make? Do they need the teacher to limit to 2 choices? Or they may just need, you know, the teacher to say, this is the work that I think we can have fun doing right now. So it's all about that observation and that connection with the child, because once we have that, then we can connect them with a place in the prepared environment where they're going to flourish and be able to indulge those sensitive periods and that inner curiosity that we all love to see.
How does that inner curiosity look when pre-adolescence and adolescence is upon us? So, Ben, when the upper school, what does independence and agency look like with the adolescents? How does that shape out? How are they given this freedom within limits?
Yeah, I mean, that's the beautiful thing. I just actually texted all 3 of our primary junior high teachers today, because there were so many moments where I saw them with the students that it was just pure joy. And it goes back to, again, what Munir and Missy just said, the prepared environment. The teachers, the space, what's before the kids, the planning that's gone into what goes in front of them, all allows them to have that agency and independence. Again, another principle about Montessori is encouraging the imagination. So by having that prepared environment, it's all there. The resources the students need, the support, the comfort, where every student feels like they can go ahead and ask those difficult questions, where they can, they're not afraid to say, this is what I want to be, this is what I'm interested in. And then to have that prepared environment that whatever that child wants, we have the tools, the skill sets, the resources in our community to support that child and help them grow in that way. So specifically in our upper school and our junior high, we have Erdkinder. So our students are involved in real work every single day, every single morning they get to it. We are producing CSA boxes. We are helping build things for the school. We are putting together e-commerce. We are, some students are sewing because they're interested in that. We have other students that are working on the finance end. We have marketing. All the students are able to find their own niche inside this community. And then on top of that, each child has other interests that are not just traditional academic interests, and they aren't interests that necessarily align with what we have going on with Erdkinder. And so we are also encouraging those children to take those routes too and see what inspires them. And so we have, again, the freedom and flexibility in our prepared environment. It's well planned, well prepared to be flexible and to follow the child.
I'm going to take it from philosophy, and I'm going to ask you all to kind of pull the curtain back to get into some tactics and some practices of what it is our teachers do. So we talk about following a child. We talk about independence and agency. The school worked with this gentleman named Simon Mainwaring. He's like a colleague of Simon Sinek, kind of a thought leader on how to organize thoughts and brands. And he came up, just sitting at the table with us, he came up with this little slogan that said, "Our curriculum is your child." And when we heard that, we're like, okay, we got to put that on a t-shirt or a coffee mug or something. Our curriculum is your child. I've never worked at an independent school that did not say we individuate and differentiate instruction. Every school says that. Every school says that. I've never been at a school like Greensboro Montessori School and Montessori schools that do it so well. And I'll tell you, that's why the training is so hard. Is it easier to pretend that on October 1st, everyone is doing inverse fractions? Of course that's easier. Is it easier to give them a worksheet and say, learn this wherever you are? Of course it's easier. It's so much easier to teach and assess. the way we teach is so rewarding and so challenging. But I wonder if I could start, Munir, if you can maybe start at early childhood, and then Missy, you could take elementary, and then Ben junior high. How do the teachers do that? How do they individuate instruction? Like, how are they keeping track of the children? What's in their journal? What's on their iPhone? What's in their spreadsheets? How do they know that one child is doing this and one child's doing this? That is a hard work. So you can kind of pull back the curtain for our parents a little bit and let some of the magic out. Tell them how we do it. Let our trade secrets out. How do we do this? You want to start up kind of the younger early childhood children? How do we do this?
Yeah, I mean, I can bring it from a teacher training perspective. We have a whole course that we teach called observation. Again, we're going to talk about observation because it does support the individualized approach that we take for each of our students. And it's not just sitting at a chair and observing. We're actually looking at what are children engaged in? What are the conversations that are happening? How are children resolving conflict? What is a child doing in this area? What have they mastered with this material? Then I know that I can take them and introduce them to something in this area. So the whole concept of observation is so important because it helps educators really prepare that individualized approach. And because we have these beautiful Montessori materials in all of the core subject areas, everyone is wherever they are. So if a child is doing high level work in one subject area, they can go and further their own experience as fast or as slow as they want, depending on where they are. But it's the educator's role to document, to take copious notes, share document what the children have been doing, how long have they been working on specific materials. Sometimes I feel we move children too quickly into the curriculum. You know, if we're looking at it from a 3 to 6 classroom, the foundation in math, for example, with the number rods, children should be spending months and months working with number rods because the indirect concepts that children gain from with the early foundation math is working with these materials. And so if a teacher is not spending the time observing, really assessing the true understanding of where the child is, it sometimes backfires. And so with this whole individualized approach, we're able to do it because we're looking at each child as a unique individual. We're looking at where they are within the curriculum and different subject areas and personalizing our approach. Teachers should be spending a lot of time observing. And so when I was at Cambridge Montessori School, I would tell my teachers, sit for 20 minutes and just observe your classroom. And that's a hard practice because we sometimes as educators want to sit and give as many lessons as possible. And we want to give as many activities and experiences. But if you don't take the time to observe, how do you really know where the child is or what more I can do with those materials? The materials are magical on their own. We don't need to really focus on that. What we need to do is make sure that the connection is there. And as Misty said, children are in a specific sensitive period for learning in all of the planes. And at the 3 to 6 level, while we don't want to say everyone's at the same level in planes, but you know that if a child has this natural ability to learn a skill, concept, language, whatever it is, it's our role to ensure that we're preparing that environment, allowing that experience so that they're naturally gaining these skills independently, individually, if that makes sense.
when it does, an observation is hard. And when Ria and I give tours, or when we used to give tours in person, it's so great when you look through the window and you'd see a teacher, like the parent would almost look like, where's the teacher? And you'd look in the corner, and we all have journals, even the administrators, that like I observe the teachers, I observe the environment, and you see them just kind of so meticulously. And I love that list you gave me here. Like, it's not just, what do you see? Like, they are trained to observe. So if observation is one of the big focuses of the early childhood in 3 to 6, it goes throughout the school, obviously. Missy, how do they individuate the curriculum, especially when we're coming into reading skills and some different types of skills? How do the teachers track that? How do they individuate that?
That's another excellent question. And to pull back the curtain a little more, as you say, so a large part of that Montessori training is you are being taught as a teacher entering the field, the scope and sequence of the Montessori lessons. Now, to understand that's not the be all end all of everything that will show up in a classroom. But it is a very clear scope and sequence of lessons for all of the areas except technology, because that wasn't really around when she was doing her method. Not in the way we think of technology today anyway. So once again, we come back to observation. And I think in traditional ed speak, it would be, I just lost the word. It's the kind of
formative and summative.
Yes, it's formative assessment where you're in the moment with the child, you're observing how they're interacting with the material. I mean, and the child may not be conscious that you're in that moment with them because you might just be nearby. I mean, now you'd be 6 feet apart, of course, but you're in that moment with the child and you're paying attention not only to what are they able to demonstrate to you as a part of that lesson, but what are the other nuances around what they're doing. And this is where that individualization really, really comes in because we're paying attention to the nuances. This is more of a 3 to 6 example of one of the things we might do, but this also transfers to lower elementary. When students are left-handed, we change the side of the child we sit on to give the lesson because left-handed children see the world a little bit differently, the way they need to approach fine motor tasks.
Love that. So
that's a very basic example. I don't think that happens in the traditional education systems that I have participated in myself. As far as reading skills and things like that, we are listening. And a large part of the elementary program in Montessori is research-based. And to do really good research, you start with a question. And then you figure out how you're going to go find that information. And that's where a lot of reading skills and literacy skills come into play, because you have to think of the question. You have to think of your resources. Then you have to be able to read what you are finding or what you want to find out. And if a child is at beginning first grade reading level, then the teacher will make sure in the environment, there might be cards that just have some simple sentences on them about that topic. Whereas if you have a child who's already read all of Harry Potter in 2nd grade, then you have other sources for them available that they can not only decode so they can sound out the words and understand what the words mean, but get a general comprehension from the whole of what they're reading. And then that gets into writing, because not only do we need to do handwriting and graphomotor skills, but we also need to talk about how to put words together so that they have meaning for other people. And if you change the way you put the words together, it changes the whole meaning and the feeling of the sentence. Some children love that. Some children would rather not. And so that also comes into the motivation. If a child is struggling with something or they tend to avoid it, the way we individualize it is we try to figure out a way we can make it fun. And if we can't, then we say, you know what? I recognize this is not fun for you. I'm going to sit with you and support you while we get through it, because it's one of those things we have to do, because we have to learn how to write, and we have to learn how to read, and we have to learn how to do some math.
Okay.
I agree. I think, Missy, one thing we should be adding in our courses is theater and drama, because it's our role to make everything exciting and not in a superficial way. Missy, right. I have something really special to show you. And so like the acting that goes behind it.
What are you going to show her?
Exactly. So that's the kind of excitement you want to build and the connection you want to make with each child individually. And also protecting that connection with each child as well, because that's our role as Montessori educators, connecting them to these experiences that naturally happen.
Munir, with that theater and that, we took a bit of a gamble with our elementary curriculum night a couple of years ago. You know, we have a lot of content to cover and only so much time. And we ended up spending 30 minutes where the teachers gave one of the great lessons and full out. Like we did the whole thing. And we didn't tell the parents what was happening. We just did it. And I kid you not, by the end of it, every parent was doing just well. They're kind of like, what's happening? Like they're just leaning through their chairs, just so excited to see what was happening. And it was Mary, someone said, that's what we're talking about. Like, look how excited you are. Like, you now want to know about the Big Bang Theory. You really want to know. And making it exciting, like the materials are magical. The children are drawn to the materials, and the teacher as a guide inspires that motivation. I love both those examples. Let's go up to the old kids. How has the curriculum stay individuated been, knowing that we're getting them ready for 10th and 11th, 12th grade, where there's SATs and PSATs, and you need to protect Ed Kinder, you need to protect independence and agency, and we're about to be measured by a different standard. How do you guys individuate the instruction for the older students?
So a couple things is one is we really get some finite lessons in small group. So the teachers are really able to work in that 3-part lesson in groups where the children can feel successful, where they can support each other. It's not necessarily just by ability. There's social dynamics. There are all sorts of things going on in that coupling and that grouping. And again, that's something where the teachers have observed the children, where they know them as human beings, not just as data points. And so all of those factors go into this qualitative grouping and measure. The other thing is the beauty of Montessori is the Montessori checklist concept. So our upper elementary students, there is a general list of topics and skills that we want all the upper elementary students to get through.
Absolutely.
Content-wise and skill-wise. And so we're keeping track of all that sort of behind the scenes. We're not putting it in front of them saying, all right, you now need to know this piece and that piece. And then the cool thing is, as it moves into junior high, it's not just a checklist, but it's a checklist that's getting worked into the real work. So when we have a student that wants to build, say, a platform for the stage for an upper elementary play, and the junior high students want to build that platform, there is proportion, geometry, physics, simple machines, their instruction. So there's technical writing, there's aesthetics, there's acoustics, you know, the list goes on. Write the instructions in Spanish as well. What is the tradition of the podium or the platform in theater and in music, you know? So there's history, there's everything that goes in behind it. And it's really what the students are interested in as to what pieces go into that. And then it's all informed by the checklist. So if the student still needs to work on simple machines, it's like, oh, great, they're doing some real work. We're going to give them a lesson in simple machines to talk about screws and levers and wedges and things like that. So, that's the beauty of this upper elementary to junior high program that we have, that the students really break down into these small groups, and they start to take more and more agency, start to feel that valorization kick in, where they're encouraged to follow their own passion. And again, the prepared environment, it becomes a little bit less about the materials and more about the adults in the space and how we're preparing everything for the child into this real work.
And that's what the teachers are trained in doing. Like, that is not easy.
It's not easy at all.
It's so much harder to teach that way. But as someone who's taught adolescents for 10, 15 years of my life, it is so rewarding with the older children. I mean, I haven't taught the younger children as much, but when you see these adolescents get fired up, what they are capable of is mind-blowing.
You can tap into their sense of wonder.
Yeah.
And it's not in front of a video screen or a video.
14-year-olds. Yeah.
That's joy.
Yeah. Ben, what were you gonna say something else on that?
I was just going to say one of the great things that we've really been focusing on last year and into this year is that ethic of excellence that comes into play. That it's the work is it's work not just for work's sake, but it's work to be done well. and so that there is a pride in it. So as you have this environment that is following the child, but also getting them to that point of excellence, and that's where that pride and that joy comes in, where they really do feel a sense of not of being essential, that what they did is important, that it matters, and therefore they feel that self-actualization as well.
Did you guys hear the way Ben said that? Being essential. As an adolescent, they feel essential. Munir, that book that Ben referenced, it's a book by Ron Berger. It's one of our, it's called An Ethic of Excellence. It's one of our more favorite non-Montessori texts. And it's kind of about project-based learning. If you're going to do something, do it right. And it just connects with, I think you'd get a kick out of it. It's an easy read, but it's called An Ethic of Excellence. Another book I just grabbed off the shelf. I don't know if you guys remember last year, Nancy Hofer, our associate head, Missy, is before you're with us, and Munir, you might appreciate this story. She told us the story. She was at the beach, and she was sort of sitting aside watching this girl. She said she was 8 or 9 years old, building this giant sandcastle. And it was kind of a turtle-shaped sandcastle, and the child was in the zone, in the flow, in the uninterrupted work cycle. Whatever words used, she was in it. And Nancy was kind of sitting back watching it, and she just watched this child for a good 10, 15, 20 minutes, really focused. And then the mom came over, and as we parents like to do, can I take a picture of you? She asked to take a picture. The daughter shooed her off the first time. So the mom kind of, went away. The mom came back again and tried to take a picture. The daughter shooed her off again. And then finally the mom came back saying, come on, smile, smile. Like, I want to show my friends this incredible work you're doing. The daughter smiled. The mom left. 1 minute later, the kid was done. They'd lost all interest. Mm-hmm. So I want to talk about that idea of getting out of the way with the prepared environment. It's one of the hardest things to do as teachers. It's even harder as parents to let them work. This is a book that I read to the faculty maybe beginning of last year or something. It's called Hum and Swish. And to me, it absolutely captures this idea, which is another phrase we love. And as parents, it is hard to do. But here's the phrase: never interrupt the concentrated child. Do not interrupt the concentrated child. What does that phrase mean to you three as Montessorians? What is that? Because that is not traditional education. It is 10:42. Let's go to math. It is October 15th. Inverse fractions. What does it mean to never interrupt the concentrated child?
For me, I just have to say, yes, it's true. It's a fact. Why do we, as Montessori educators, provide long periods of uninterrupted work? Why do we want children to have so much time during a work cycle to engage in meaningful work and take the time that they need to discover, learn naturally at their own pace, get that whatever satisfaction that they're going to get from that material? And that we can take that example even in our own work as adults. If you're focused on a project, you're making something, creating something, doing something, and someone bothers you in the middle of that creation, that moment, that just moment is taken away from you. And that is the same for the children in the classrooms. When they're focused and concentrated and really making these connections with the materials or with their lessons or with their activities, the moment we disturb them, we rob them from what they were going to discover or learn at their own pace. And it all ties in naturally to respecting children and respecting their work and giving them the flexibility and freedom. And we're in this state where, and I understand, because our approach is so hands-on, and it's hard to communicate on a day-to-day basis with our families. What exactly did they do today or learn today? And so we sometimes sit there and try to capture pictures or capture documents to show evidence that look at this kind of work, but it sometimes comes at a cost, and it comes at a cost to the child and their learning. I have this debate with my sister-in-law all the time, because the thing that I see all the time is phone capturing every experience possible.
Yeah, it's hard. I love that idea that's being more respectful and almost disrespectful. You said even a big word, it's almost robbing them of that focused time. And it's hard.
Yeah.
I ask our children when they come home, we say, what works did you do? You know, because all of us, if we ask, how was your day? Even Montessori kids, you don't get a good answer. But I say, what works do you do? And it's my first year at the school. I remember Grayson, he was probably 3 at that point, first year primary. He said, I got to do maps all day long. I got to do maps or map work all day long. And I talked to Isabel and Gail, and it was both the morning work cycle, and then he came back to us. It was almost 4 hours did a 3-year-old. He was so proud. And then during the pandemic, I snuck up here and stole all the map trays and brought them to my house, and he was happy as a lark. Ben and Missy, how do you guys deal with never interrupting the concentrated child? What does that mean to you both?
Well, I think, first of all, one of the ways to look at it from a parenting perspective is we want them to concentrate when we want them to concentrate, and we want them to hurry up when we want them to hurry up, because we want our children to fit into our world and our schedule. And, you know, speaking as I'm the parent of a 21-year-old, so this was a long time ago. I don't fit in his world anymore. But if we think about, I hate to use the word hypocritical, but it's a little hypocritical because we expect them to be able to perform on demand the way we need them to in the moment, when we're the ones that have gained all the life skills and gained the sense of perspective to understand changes and things. Whereas these children have been on the planet, you know, maybe 8 years, and they don't have that perspective, or maybe 3 years, when they can hold a rock for 5 minutes and be just completely entranced. And we're like, oh, especially if we don't have our phones with us, then we're like bereft and like, oh my gosh. So I think it helps us when we talk about not interrupting a concentrating child, because they're doing big work. Like as we are watching the child be enthralled by the rock, there's like so many impulses flying around in their brain at that moment. They're making connections that we could try to directly teach them, and it's not going to be the same thing. So if we shift our perspective a little bit and think about when their child's driving us crazy because they're not coming when we want them to, and they're entranced by this rock, big brain growth is happening. Their ability to concentrate when they're 16 and, you know, taking geometry or whatever they'll call math by that point, they will have gotten those concentration lessons early in life. So they'll be able to, that skill will already be a part of them. So to me, when we talk about never, and I hate using absolutes like that, because of course, if it's lunchtime, we got to stop the work cycle. You got to stop concentrating so that we can feed you. But when we don't need to, and when we become an obstacle to the child and an obstacle to the child's development, which is like a child's trying to put a puzzle together and the adult sees them struggle and they want to jump in and help, rather than, because they feel like that's the loving thing to do, rather than sitting back and observing how the child works through the struggle and then celebrating that with them on the inside, because we're not going to praise, because we don't do praise in Montessori. They've gained so much more when they work through that themselves. And if we can get out of their way, let them concentrate, let them do their work, they are going to be better off.
Yeah, and so important that that freedom is within limits. You know, because think about the whole lot for our panelists or attendees, think of the whole last set of questions. When the children are working, we're not getting coffee, we're not relaxing, we're not checking Facebook. That's like we're observing, we're watching, we're setting out different works in different ways, and that's where some of the best guiding happens when they're working. And someone said that, it might have been you, Missy, that they have those skills built in. So in regular education, there's this big word, executive functioning. And executive functioning is something that every school, again, kind of like individuating instruction, every school says, oh, no, yeah, it's good. Our older children, our adolescents have executive functioning. Before I ask how Montessorians promote executive functioning, or not promote, how it fits with us, can someone give a quick definition of executive functioning? Munir, you want to go first?
I could try. So I highly recommend Montessori Science Behind the Genius. And it's by Dr. Angeline Lillard. She is a researcher And in chapter 4, she beautifully summarizes executive functioning and how it naturally is part of Montessori practice. So executive function is like a set of mental skills that include the working memory, the concept of flexible thinking, where you can really think from multiple perspectives, and self-control. And so we use these skills even as adults daily in our work and how we learn and how we even manage our life. And so according to Lillard, executive function is responsible for many skills, including paying attention. And so we talked just now about concentration, organizing, planning, prioritizing, starting a task and staying focused on that task until completion, understanding different points of view, regulating your emotions, and then that self-desire, that self-monitoring, keeping track of your own work, your own self. And so when you look at these points in Montessori, this is a very high level, sophisticated definition of normalization. And so concentration is a major feature in Montessori education. And so when we're looking at paying attention, we're intentional with protecting children's concentration, but encouraging concentration. We try to build within our students an ability to, when you choose work, you take work. You go find your space in the classroom to do this work. You planning, you're thinking about it, you're figuring out how you're going to do it. And then when you take this work, we want the children eventually to not just choose and focus on the work, but complete the work before restoring it back on the shelf for another child to take. And that naturally happens in the process of what we call normalization in the classroom. And that cycle continues. And when that is part of the normal culture of the classroom, that is what I define as executive functioning and supporting the process of executive functioning. And so according to Lillard, in her book, chapter 4 is a fabulous chapter, she predicts measures of life success as well as the satisfaction of everything that we do that is specific to the cognitive and social outcomes all happens naturally in Montessori education and practice.
I know Missy's going to add to that, but that reminds me what, so Stephen Hughes, who was all over the video, that if you got to see the documentary, he spent a week at our school 2 years ago, and he was really impressed. He was impressed. He really enjoyed our school, and it means a lot to us when someone of that caliber who's seen that many schools is impressed by what we're doing. And one of his phrases that he says, we also want to put this on a t-shirt and on coffee mugs. He says what children need when they go out into the world is the ability to look around, see what needs to be done, and do it. That's like, as far as employers, that's what people are hiring. That's what makes you successful. And I think that's, I hadn't connected till right now, but I think that's his definition of executive functioning. Look around, see what needs to be done, and do it. Missy, I know you're jumping at the bit to say something else about executive function. What do you got?
I'm jumping at the bit to talk about all of this because this is my passion. I've been doing it for over 22 years now. And I'm only 23, so. So I don't know if any of you have out in our listener viewer land have ever had the opportunity to watch a 3 to 6 teacher present table washing. But if you look at the lesson plan written up in most early childhood albums, which is what we call basically our set of lesson plans, our scope and our sequence, our curriculum, beyond the child, of course, there's probably 20 some steps for table washing. 3-year-olds do these 20 some steps for table washing. They have to start with the first thing and get the first thing and put it in the right place. Then they have to get the second thing and put it in the right place. Then they have to get the third thing and put it in the right place. When I think about, I've been trying to read a lot more about how Montessori education helps form synapses in the brain, that are easily accessible later on. And I am not even close to being well read on that yet. But when I think about children who repeat that work, sometimes more than once a day, but 3-year-olds repeating and 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds, because it's also very calming work. When they repeat that and they repeat all of those steps every single time, they are preparing their brain to plan. They are given a structure for a filing system for what to do first, what to do second, what to do third, what to do fourth, what to do fifth. And then back to, you know, Munir's point about the beginning, middle, and end of a task. And we have expectation in the classroom that they go through the beginning, middle, and end of a task. And even kind of deeper on that idea, so if a child is going to choose a rug work, they have to get the rug before they get the work. That's some pretty advanced pre-planning for a 3-year-old. And, you know, I think we've said that early childhood is kind of, it's the area that Maria Montessori spent the most time observing and developing, but it's also absolutely a critical time of child development. And there's more and more research coming out now that supports that 0 to 6 is the most important time in child development. And it has been one of the most underlooked at, under-supported areas of child development, and that's changing now. But what great things we're giving these children for executive functioning. Like, we're programming their brain. Now, does it mean, Ben, that when they get up to junior high, all of those table washing steps are going to show up and perfect executive functioning is going to occur? Talk more.
No, they don't clean the tables at all. They're a mess. I'm just joking.
They're in their sensitive period for disorder.
Correct.
There's the scientific answer to all the adolescent parents out there.
And that's actually true. Yeah, we're not just making that up.
Well, I wonder, so we've kind of talked about independence and agency, how it takes us to observe the children, to kind of support them as we individualize, how that kicks into letting them work, which we kind of hit a lot of the core philosophies of Montessori. I'm going to pivot us for a second back to the video. So one of the sections in the video was about City Garden School in St. Louis, Missouri. I used to live in St. Louis. I know the school quite well. I know Christy Huck, the director there, a lot of the teachers, a lot of my friends sent their children there. It's a great school. And their program director or academic director during that time is actually the board president of AMS now, Amira. So a lot of good connections to that school. And they've really fully embraced anti-racist and anti-bias work, and that was the feature of the video. And so I want to talk about that for a little bit with our panelists here. And so the structure I'd like to do is I'm going to first start with Missy to kind of give us a quick overview of Montessori's peace curriculum. What does that mean? What is it about? Because that grounds City Garden's anti-racist, anti-bias work, and it grounds our sense of respect for differences, and it's something that the world, quite frankly, needs a lot of right now. And then I'm going to pivot to Munir and Ben to kind of talk about where that goes and how that shows up in our schools. So what's the peace education curriculum all about for us, Missy?
Well, I think that that's multi-layered, and I think that it's currently shifting, because I think we're moving from a place where the past thinking when I first started in my Montessori career was that we didn't necessarily highlight and celebrate differences. We focused instead on commonalities, and differences we kind of put in the background, which, you know, learning more in my own anti-bias, anti-racism work that I'm doing personally was absolutely the wrong thing to do. So coming at it now from a Montessori peace curriculum, and like I said, that has, I think, some different meanings for different people. For one thing, it can mean conflict resolution. So the fact that children are prepared to handle when they have disagreements with other humans in a respectful and open-minded way, that's an element of the peace curriculum that is taught in every training program I've ever been a part of. But I think, and India Adams, who is the head of the training center in Charlotte, she made a big point this summer that there is no peace curriculum. Peace is in every single thing we do. The way everybody shows up, and we hold dignity for them. They have dignity. They have valorization. They have the same right and entitlement to be in that classroom and access those works as every other child. And we act as if there's no other possibility. So that is peace education. That's saying you show up and you look like this and you have just as much right and possibility and agency and dignity and possibilities as the person who shows up and looks like that, or the person that shows up and came from that background or came from that place. Everybody shows up and we're not all the same, but we're all pretty awesome. And we all have a right to be there. We all have a right to be treated with respect. We all have a right to hear our voices heard and our stories heard. We have a right to be in community with other people. And one of the things we talked about, what I was talking about with India, is that the fact that there's only one of all of the works. You learn patience, you learn turn taking, you learn, oh, I really wanted to do that work. When you're finished with that, will you let me know so I can go grab it? So, which is, preventing conflict. And I want to close my part of that with saying peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is the ability to manage conflict in a way that doesn't tear other people down.
So with that last phrase you made, I remember it was my first week at school and I was talking to Nancy, what my interpretation was as a 1 week in Montessorian. I said, yeah, isn't the peace table, it's just about finding compromise, like negotiating with each other. I got an earful that night. It took like 2 hours. I had a deeper understanding that the peace table is about showing up, who you are, and fully seeing that. And another phrase I love is lean into the complexity of that. So often we're afraid to lean into the complexity of what others are. Yeah. So with that basis of peace, with knowing on what's going on in our world, in our city, in our country, Munir, I'm going to press you on this one because you've seen a lot more Montessori schools across the country. And you and I talked a lot about this last summer and this summer. Is that enough? Is the peace curriculum that we're doing, is that enough?
No, absolutely not. In fact, I agree with India, Missy. I don't think peace is a curriculum. I think it's principles embedded into our philosophy that we should be promoting within the day experiences with students. I think sometimes it's easy to say we have a peace curriculum, but the principles of peace education, and we also as Montessori educators are proudly say everything we do is based on grace and courtesy. And so when you take these kinds of concepts, it doesn't cover actually the bias that's built into all of our systems. And so when we're looking at it as a national organization, AMS had a peace committee, and the peace committee would get together and really think of ways into bringing curriculum in the classroom or activities that promote peace or conflict resolution, anything that had to do with this area. And over the last 3 years, AMS as a national organization has been really thinking about justice, equity, inclusion, as all of these buzzwords that we're hearing right now in mainstream media that is what we need to do and what we need to focus on in our curriculum, in our schools, in our teacher education programs. And so I'm excited because AMS just got a major grant few months ago to really do a complete institutional audit in terms of how, as an organization, how we function. What are the practices and policies in place that support one group but might not support the other? Looking at even the rubrics that are used and how we select people like the AMS Living Legacy, for example. Looking at the two commissions, the School Accreditation Commission and then the Teacher Education Action Commission. And so with this, we are, as a national organization, going to be requiring our AMS affiliated teacher education programs to completely add A-bar work and training as part of the course requirements before you get a Montessori AMS teaching credential. And so that I'm excited about that. And we're really even shifted the Peace Committee. It's no longer called the Peace Committee. It's called the Peace and Social Justice Committee. And then we have a national standing committee called the Justice, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee that's going to be supporting the work of all of these audits that we have to create, the curriculum pieces, the teacher education programs, so that it goes to the School Accreditation Commission and it goes to the Teacher Education Action Commission, and then it filters through our teacher education programs in our schools. And one major project that we're also going to be working on is, while we can control teacher education moving forward in terms of the expectation of training, AMS is 60 years old. So there's teachers that have been credentialed over the last 60 years that don't have this education or background. And wherever people are on their journey, it's our role as leaders, as educators, to bring them back and saying, this is an area we as a national organization, as a Montessori community, we can do better. And we are going to do better. And here are some of the resources, tools, books, anything to do with A-bar, providing it as a resource to the community. The world is different now, you know, and I don't want to get into the politics of it, but all I can say is we have to make sure that our curriculum reflects the world today, not as it was a century ago. And it doesn't make us less Montessori. In fact, it makes us more, because it embeds the true philosophy of what Montessori really wrote about when it came to holistic education, peace education, and the peaceful world. And the anti-bias, anti-racist, all of those principles that are out there, we need to do a better job and embrace them into our classrooms and communities.
I mean, I think all those focuses and those initiatives that the AMS is working, I think it's one of the reasons that many of the member schools, ourselves included, are excited that you're at the helm right now. Like, it's an important time, and I know that that's been a priority because, again, no judgment, but sometimes people have said, especially a little bit of a different generation of Montessori leaders, that, oh, we have the peace curriculum and we're okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously I set you up with the answer that no, it's not enough. It's not enough for us either. I really appreciate all the efforts you're doing, and as one of your member schools.
Yeah.
So as far as the students, so it does connect directly to the to Montessori's values and how we teach our students. That, like India says, there's one work. Another catchphrase we use is that Montessorians don't share. You know, that's a running joke amongst us, but it's the idea that you have patience, that you do wait. Like, we don't force children to share, just like we don't force children to apologize at our schools, you guys. Like, we don't force them to apologize. We're going to coach them and work them, and not work them, work with them and listen to them. Yeah. I'm kind of going towards, I'm just thinking about the adolescents right now, because they're the ones who developmentally, social justice, the sense of justice is right where they are. You know, for any of us that have pre-adolescent, you know, that phrase, it's not fair. That's what they're supposed to be thinking about. And so, Ben, I want to pivot up to the junior high and the upper school program again. How do our older students make sense of this, and how do our teacher guides give them opportunities, be it for A-bar, which again, like Munir said, is anti-bias and anti-racist training, or equity or justice, or what sense do they make of it? How does it show up at our middle school and our junior high years?
Yeah, it's I think one of the key things is that we're not trying to shy away from the discussion, and that's part of the prepared environment, is to be able to show our students and the community, and show that they can show each other what it looks like to have a discourse and conversation about this, instead of sort of going down to lowest common denominator of ad hominem, hyperbole, and things that are out there right now. So their ability to be in a comfortable space again, where they feel like they can express their own opinion, they can be themselves, is of utmost importance. And then our curriculum, again, it's all in it. It's a peace education, it's a cosmic education, it's all there, so that we're coming to the table rooted in these Montessori principles, where everybody is unique, nobody's special, nobody's elevated above anybody else. Each of us is unique, which is key. Very specifically, we are addressing. Ibram Kendi has a book that he's co-authored for the adolescent, based on Stamp from the beginning. So we're addressing these things. We studied W.B. Du Bois and Washington last year, and the students have an understanding of our story as a people, as a humanity, that we're all a part of, and that we're on the leading edge of it right now, so that we are not only informed by everything before us, but we're informed by everything we want to be. So in many ways, it's okay to talk about being anti-racist. It's something that that some folks are shying away from, but I do think it's an important distinction, because we can't just act like history didn't happen. So we are here for a reason, and each of us comes to the table with our own story. In upper elementary, it's really neat how we get to this. As fourth graders, our upper elementary students work on a project where they do a personal timeline. In fifth grade, they do a family tree, and that family tree is not just not just two parents and two parents from each of them and all that. It's about, what is your family life? Who do you associate with? What are their stories of the people that are influencing you, because of the way family can look right now. And then we move to a service project for the sixth graders as capstone work. So they're taking their personal story, their family story, along with all of the history that they've learned, and then applying it and say, how can I start to make the world better? So they engage in a capstone project where they're actually starting to give back. And then that feeds right into the junior high, and broader social justice topics as they start to get engaged in national and international news and locally as well. For example, another great example is when some of this activity started last spring. This goes back to the prepared environment, the flexibility, the imagination. The students, we couldn't just continue our history program as we had planned in the spring. We had COVID. We had things going on with social justice sphere out there, and the students wanted to talk about it. So we as a faculty adjusted everything. So they're writing, the history program, everything, we started to frame everything in that language. The way we address history, we talk about forces at work. We talk about philosophies at work. We talk about things that make people make decisions and why. And so we can use any current event or historical example as a way where all these forces are coming into action, so that they can then better understand future situations and things going on outside of their own personal world, and understand that all these forces are always at play. So anti-racism is a big piece of that. So it's really neat to see these students take that on and really start to ask themselves questions. And again, they're in an environment where they're not going to get attacked for having a different opinion.
Right.
They're in an environment where everybody's going to listen, where our faculty are going to support every opinion out there, and where we don't just want random opinions. We want to know where that's coming from. Where's the information behind that? So we're and again, so it's a safe space. We use Socratic seminar. That's huge in the Montessori world. That's actually how I came to the Montessori world, because I went to a Socratic mastermind conference and everybody was a Montessorian.
Except for Ben.
Except for me. I'm the odd man out.
Say,
So what is
like,
this
these people are also great.
Yeah, it's just wonderful. So it was this fantastic discussion, and it was folks from every background, every walk of life, all over the country and world came together, and we were able to have a discussion. Again, and unfortunately, that's not what we see out there on the news all the time. That's not what makes the headlines. That's not what gets the likes on Twitter. But we can teach our students that you can do that. That there is a way to access that.
I love it that in each of your three answers, you dropped just about every single word that we've talked about for the last hour. You know, you guys use the word independence, you use the word empower, you use the word prepared environment, you use the word safe spaces. Like, it's so great that it's so directly connected, which brings us back to the point that it is, like India said, more than a piece curriculum, but it, just like Montessori, it's not a methodology, it's a way of living. Like, I come from character education. People are like, is that a poster? Like, no, it is a way of living and breathing. And that's what Montessori is. And it lives and breathes in different ways in our schools. And it's great. So I'm checking the time. A topic we were going to talk about, and I think I'm going to ask just Munir one question. I'll give a quick report instead of bring it to Missy and Ben. But we wanted to spend a little time talking about how Montessori schools, ours included, have fared during COVID. Because some of us going into it, especially remote learning last spring, we're pretty spooked. We're on a program that's driven by hands-on learning, pretty hard to do remotely, all driven by observation. It's pretty hard to observe through a screen, and all driven by individualized lessons. It's pretty hard to give 200 individualized lessons over the screen. And yet, our students blew us away. Mm-hmm. And what we finally figured out, and the mayor, I'll ask you what stories you've heard from across the country with AMS schools. We figured out that our students, they work for working's sake. They're not working for that gold star. So they were into those projects. Those executive functioning skills, they had them. Sometimes we had to get our parents to use the word work instead of something. And all of a sudden you put out like a little hand towel, then you could see the child like just click their brain like, oh, okay, let's get to work. This is great. And I was shocked, quite frankly, and just so pleasantly surprised. But then it made sense when we unpacked how well our kids did. And as far as this fall, about 14% of our families 14% of our students are choosing remote learning right now. They've had a couple pods that have, due to COVID situations, had to go in and out of remote learning. And I'm really proud of the program we're putting together, but how the students are faring. Here at school, Ben made the comment that it still feels like family. It still feels like they're present. Remarkably, the students do great with masks. Do they need reminders? Of course. Are the teachers spending extra work cleaning the environment, cleaning materials? They sure are. It's taking time. Is it stressful for the teachers with the germs that are introduced into our community? Of course it is. Do we appreciate the partnership from our families? We really do. That you're all wearing masks in Caroline, that you're filling out those surveys or the screenings, and that, you know, our cutoff is 100.4 for a fever. Someone had 100.2, like, well, yeah, I'm gonna keep them home just in case. Or I passed the screening, I'm still gonna take them home just in case. I'm gonna work with you. We've had great partnership. That's one of the things that we've succeeded at as a Montessori school with our community here in Greensboro. Munir, how are our fellow Montessori schools faring, both at home or in person with COVID-19?
So I've made two observations. And so one has to do with our beautiful Montessori community. Get scared when you hear the word technology, or even the concept of technology and how it's utilized in our spaces. And COVID-19 has forced Montessori educators to embrace technology in a way that it's no longer scary. And so from the stories that I've heard from our teacher education programs, you couldn't even go to a TAC meeting without being a full argument about, no, we're not going to teach this course online. There's no way. And now the entire community is like, thank God we had Zoom and these online resources, and it's working, and we're making these connections. And so I think long-term, it's gonna support the Montessori community to really reevaluate teacher education and making it more accessible. You know, it's a commitment in the way we approach teacher education. You have to give up 2 summers, spend 10 hours a day. You did this work, Kevin, you know. And it's big work. And then also it limits who can actually go to training, because some teachers have to work. They don't have the luxury to take time. So for the teacher education piece, I think it's going to really support a different conversation post-COVID. Now, from parents, what I have and I talk about this a lot, is we already know Montessori education works. The hard skills, we know that those measurable outcomes are easy to identify in everything that we report to the parents all the time. Everything that we even put in our progress reports or communication to parents, it's easy, and parents understand that absolutely they're getting those measurable skills. The area that parents are naturally seeing now is, traditionally we call them soft skills. I like to call them critical skills. And those are the things that are, those skills are what's going to prepare our children to be successful in the future. Yeah. And so looking at parents being able to see, wow, yes, my child has time management skills, self-motivation to get work done. They have focus and concentration, confidence, flexibility, patience, initiative, autonomy. All of these critical skills that we talk about naturally are skills that Montessori students gain by being in these prepared environments. And it's not taught in a traditional way, it's natural. And so given that we've had to pivot and we have had to adjust our environments, I am concerned about the young ones, the birth to 3 or even birth to 4-year-olds, because they're in a sensitive period for socialization and the social skills that are missing. But when it comes to the older students, their behavior, the approach, everything that they're doing on their own, that is speaking for itself. We don't do a good job talking about these critical skills that Montessori students gain. And so this is an actual time for us as a Montessori community to highlight how our students are successful and how they've been able to pivot and continue working, as we say, in different situations, regardless if it's at home or if it's in a compromised learning environment or a smaller group size. They're still successful. And the stories that I'm getting from quite a few AMS members, heads of schools, are the power of children showing that they love learning and they want to continue in whatever format. It's particularly the elementary, middle school students. And so, I want to take it as an opportunity. And so what it's going to do for us long term, I think is going to benefit the community.
I love that. I'm sure Missy and Ben would love to share some of the success stories that we've had. We are coming to the point that I'm going to ask for a final thought, and then we'll say good evening to everybody. And so my final question is this. One of the Stephen Hughes in the video said, never has Montessori education, never has there been a more relevant time than now. And my question is about the Montessori graduate. Whether they graduate from an elementary program, a junior high program, and a high school program. We have toddler families on this call. We have a couple of prospective parents on this call. We have some junior high parents on this call. My question is, what are the skills? What are the habits of mind? What are the personality traits? What are the ways of thinking, the ways of walking in this world that you think is most important or most valuable or emblematic of a Montessori graduate? And just for fun, you got to say your answer in less than 30 seconds. So good luck with that, folks. Does one of you want to start out? What are some of the, in a very brief answer, some of the most important traits of a Montessori graduate for each of you? Miss, you want to start?
Absolutely. Growth mindset and a sense of being capable and respectful.
Yeah. It's great. Thanks, Missy. Ben or Munir, do you guys have thoughts on that? Ben?
I'm going to say self-confident, empathetic, and imaginative. I think those are being able to see all the possibilities out there.
Yeah, I'm going to I think everything I said earlier about these critical skills.
You kind of answered it pretty well there.
But if I have to say a few more words, I'll say, I agree with Missy. It is the kindness and solution-based approach, and just understanding that everyone is a unique individual and everyone belongs, and there's a space for everybody. And just that level of joy, love, and respect as a human being and how you contribute to society is what makes Montessori so special to me.
I think my answer would be somewhat similar to all three of yours. And I used this phrase earlier, that our graduates know how to lean into complexity. I think one of the biggest challenges in our world right now is complexity is seen as a vice. That we're becoming so polarized, single thought is driving relationships and connections, and not our Montessori students. Complexity is not a vice for our 2-year-olds, for our 14-years-old. They know how to lean into complexity in respectful and kind ways. Talking to you all gives me excitement, gives me faith in humanity, gives me faith in the future of our, not to be silly, but our world. Like that we're helping graduate good, strong people, good, strong citizens. Ben, Missy, Munir, thank you so much for the conversation. Thank you for the time. We appreciate all of you guys have busy worlds, and we really appreciate the time. To all of our panelists and attendees that were able to join us, hopefully you enjoyed the conversation. We'll send out an email with a couple follow-up links, or there's some videos or some articles or books that we referenced. We'll try to catch those in an email to you all later. But let the dialogue continue about Montessori and about what makes each of us unique. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope you have a great evening.